Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're going to get started in a moment. We're just admitting those who are waiting in the Zoom waiting room here. But I'm going to get started. We have a tight schedule this morning. First, I should introduce myself. My name is Josh Evans. I'm an associate professor at the University of Alberta. I'm also the research lead for the Affordable Housing Solutions Lab. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all this morning. I'll be giving a short introduction. I'll just be touching on a few housekeeping items, like just briefly talking about what we're trying to do here, and then I'll be introducing our facilitators and handing the reins over to them. I just want to start with a few housekeeping items, just so we can ensure this meeting is smooth this morning. We kindly ask that all of you here in Zoom with us keep your cameras and microphones off for the time being until we go into our breakout rooms, which will happen a little bit later this morning. When you are in the breakout rooms, we encourage you to turn your camera on and unmute your microphone when speaking, and interact as much as you would like. If you would like to use closed captioning or live transcription, please click on the CC Live Transcript button on the right-hand side of your Zoom toolbar below the bottom of your screen. You'll be given the option of turning the closed captions on, and you can also adjust the text size in addition to moving it around your screen. And we want to thank Laura, who is our real-time captioner today, and she's providing us with CART services, which stands for Communication Access Real-Time Translation. One note, though, is that when you return back from a breakout session, you may have to turn closed captions and live translation back on. It might require you to do that. Next, if you're having any technical difficulties or issues, or you require any aids to participate, please type a message in the chat box to Laura, and we'll try and assist you as quickly as we can. We are recording this meeting today, and we are recording everything except the Zoom breakout session. So all of that conversation is not going to be recorded. We're recording the information pieces so that we can share with some of the folks who weren't able to join us this morning. But in our recordings, all the attendees will remain anonymous, and we'll look closely at the recording before sharing with others to ensure that we preserved anonymity where required. You should have received an email this morning around 8:30 with a participant guide, some materials that you can use to help you participate in this meeting today. It's a companion guide to this morning's activities. If you don't have that, please let us know. Put a message in the chat box, and we'll get that to you as soon as we can. At the end of today's orientation, we have a short survey, and the purpose of this survey is just to gather some feedback and input to help us improve on this process. So if you could fill out this survey, we'd really appreciate it. It'll help us improve the process for the next meeting, which we plan for November 2nd. Okay, those are the housekeeping items I had. I'm just gonna move on now. What I'd like to start with today is a land acknowledgement. And if you've had a chance to look at the participant materials, you'll see that we'll be exploring many concepts together today. Concepts like equity, inclusion, justice, power, and we'll be exploring these today in relation to housing. And so with this land acknowledgement, I want to recognize that when we're talking about housing today, we are talking about housing that's located on Treaty 6 territory, and that our conversations will respect the histories, languages, and cultures of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community here in Edmonton. What I'd like to do next is just provide very briefly some quick background to this process that we've designed and the process you're participating in today. I'll just take a few steps backwards though and just introduce the Affordable Housing Solutions Lab. Perhaps if you're new to the lab and you're not familiar with us, essentially this lab was set up to function as a catalyst for expanding the supply, diversity, and accessibility of safe, affordable, and adequate housing here in Edmonton. And the lab facilitates, convenes, supports many different activities. This is just one example of some of the work that we've been doing. And our activities involve a range of different stakeholders and individuals with interests in housing and affordable housing in particular. Increasingly over time, the work that we've been doing in the lab has come to be shaped by the right to housing and the right to housing lens. And this is a really important framework to work with. It recognizes that homelessness, inadequate housing, in a country as wealthy as Canada, these constitute a serious human right violation. And most recently, this has been recognized in Canadian law, and governments in Canada must ensure that the right to housing is enjoyed equally without discrimination. Yet, despite this being in law, there's still a lot of work we have to do together. There's too many Edmontonians today who are living in inadequate housing or have no housing at all. And this isn't because of any lack of effort, it's due to systemic barriers. And it's these systemic barriers that we really want to examine and explore through this process that we've come to call the pivot. And the pivot is a process we designed, and the end goal here ahead of us in the future is to convene and support a number of community-based action research projects. And the overarching question that these projects will address is the following here. What actions can we take in the next 6 months to help pivot Edmonton's housing system towards the progressive realization of the right to adequate housing? So this is what lies ahead of us, is pulling together some individuals from the community, from the housing sector, from universities, to form these projects and to work towards the progressive realization of the right to adequate housing. So the work we're doing today and in the coming weeks is really building towards this research. We've gathered here today for an orientation. On November 2nd, we have a virtual gathering, and then subsequently we have planned these 5-week hikes. And at the end of those hikes, what we hope to have is a list of actions, and perhaps even a prioritized list of these actions around which we can build some community-based research teams. But before we get there, we need to build some shared understanding. We need to put some things in place to have some courageous conversations about systemic barriers to adequate housing. And that's why we've gathered here this morning for this orientation. So I just wanted to give you a sense of why we're here, give you some context for what we're trying to do during this meeting this morning, and how this fits in with the broader process that we've called the pivot. So there's a few things to highlight here with respect to your participation. First, it's important to be clear that your participation today and in the future in this process we're calling the pivot is completely voluntary. You can withdraw and leave at any time, including this morning. Your decision to participate or not participate has no bearing on any future involvement with the Affordable Housing Solutions Lab. Second, the important thing to note, as I mentioned earlier, is that we are recording these meetings, but We won't be recording any of the small group discussions that will be happening in the breakout sessions. We will have some facilitators in those sessions who will be taking some notes. And the purpose of these notes is just so we can share what we learned back to you, the participants. But in these notes, we won't be capturing anybody's names. They'll all be anonymous. And in the summary document we share back to you, that will contain no identifying information. So that's important to make clear to you this morning. At any time, if you do have questions that you'd like to raise, we welcome all of those questions. There'll be many opportunities for you to engage in conversation in small groups and in the larger group. And there's many ways you can pose those questions, either in the chat box or by enabling your mic and your camera. What I'd like to do next, though, is introduce our facilitators. We're really lucky to have two amazing facilitators this morning, and I'll just take a moment to introduce them, share a little bit of information about each of them, and then I'm going to hand over the controls to them, and we'll get going with our meeting this morning. So first, I'd like to introduce Tina Faze, who is a strategic equity and public affairs consultant with over 20 years of leadership experience in government at the University of Alberta and in media, advancing climate, racial, and social justice issues. Tina is also an award-winning author, a former producer with CBC News, and member of the Edmonton Public Library's Board of Trustees, where she's dedicated to free, universal, and barrier-free access to knowledge and information for all Edmontonians. Welcome, Tina. Hello. Next, I'd like to introduce Natasha Goodar. Natasha holds a master's degree in education from the University of Alberta. She has been an anti-racism, equity, and inclusion educator, organizer, and strategic consultant for over 20 years. She has 15 years of experience in leading systemic change for equity and inclusion integration into complex organizations and systems, including 9.5 years at the Edmonton Police Service. Natasha's passion is working with communities and organizations that want to contribute to achieving social, environmental, and economic justice for all. Welcome, Natasha. So I'm so happy that you're here with us today. I'm really looking forward to today's meeting. And I just want to again thank everyone here who's joined us and for your time. It's amazing that you've put aside this time with us until noon today. So I really want to acknowledge that as well. So I'm going to hand this over to you, Tina and Natasha, and let's get started.
Wonderful, Josh. Thank you so much for that introduction, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you all. Another person, we wanted to give you a bit of a broader picture of who's all gathered here today. To broaden our understanding of who we're sharing the space with and ways where the issue of housing impacts us and brings us together. So when you registered, we asked you to identify sort of a category with which you identify with, and here's what you shared. And so we want to show you who's all here. So about over a quarter of you who are with us identified as academics, either students or full-time working, lecturing, researching. About roughly 13% housing advocates, another 5% a housing management body, and another 10% that are in our provider operator of non-market housing, and a smaller percentage for the public sector. I believe some of these numbers are a little bit different than what I'm sharing, what I had yesterday. We had a few people come in and leave, but the piece that you'll see is the largest is the red chunk of the pie. Our first voice advocates, a little over 30%. And I want to pause on this term and the size of the number that we're seeing here. And you'll hear us use the term individuals with lived experience or rights holders or first voice advocates. And this is our largest group today, and that's by design. because we fundamentally believe in a notion of nothing about us without us, which is coined originally by the disability justice movement. And as the lab itself and as Tash and I, the equity facilitators, we also believe it's vital for us to be centering the voices and the agency and the choices of communities that are historically and systemically marginalized, because those who have the experience of housing insecurity in Edmonton and in our region ultimately have the best solutions to address it. Right? They understand deeply the systemic barriers that Josh mentioned as we started, and the intersecting factors that create housing insecurity. They are people who experientially know about the issue. And so Tash and I like to refer to these folks, and it comes from the Tamarack Institute, the term called experts by experience. Right, who provide invaluable knowledge and strength and resiliency to addressing root causes. And in the topic we're discussing today of insecure housing. And so we value that expertise alongside the expertise of those in our institutions and in our systems, whom we call systems experts, right? Those are everybody else that I've mentioned here, academics, individuals and staff, and volunteers of housing organizations and operators and government officials and community leaders who have the knowledge and the tools and the resources to address this issue. So having said all that, I also want to say that we respect and appreciate that we all also have intersecting identities and complex roles we all play, and that means some of us are both systems and experience experts. And so we're just so happy to see a diverse cross-section of expertise gathered here today. And that's who's all here with us. Now, for the rest of the day, we have 3 objectives we're going to go through, and it's going to feel short and probably not enough time to deeply get into these issues. But our hope is to really, as Josh mentioned about courageous conversations, right? For us to be able to build a brave space together so that we can have, engage in the learning and the dialogue so that we can together advance the human right to housing. We're going to develop some shared understanding of key concepts of equity and inclusion and justice within the context of right to housing. We'll spend about an hour on this and take a 10-minute break where we will review some definitions. And then we'll spend the rest of the morning really talking about power, because we cannot take an equity-centered approach to this initiative, to the pivot, without really identifying and addressing the power differentials that exist between participants both here and in the systems that we ultimately hope to change. So we're going to consider spend a little bit of time thinking through our own social positions and our own access to power and influence, and how that influences our ability to access housing. And we'll work on, reflecting on forms of power each of us have that we can leverage. And then we can come back together for a short closing, and then we'll share some details about part 2 of the session in November, which is happening November 2nd. The only other housekeeping bit that I just want to add to everything that Josh shared earlier today is that I mentioned one of the breaks. We're going to take 2 10-minute breaks, but please feel free to get up and take a break as you need it, and participate in the best way that feels comfortable to you. And you've already seen us use Menti. We're going to be using several tools today. We're going to participate, do some activities with Google Docs. And yeah, those are the tools that we're going to do today. I'll hand it off to Tash to kick us off on talking about brave spaces.
Thanks, Tina. And so that everybody, I just would invite, if you feel like it, you can totally take your, you can totally put your camera on now. as we start to engage in more of a process. We know obviously that that would be incredibly valuable for the small groups, but also we will be moving to large group discussions and individual and so on and so forth. So just do what you need to do as far as whatever feels comfortable for when you put your camera on or take it off and stuff like that. So I want to start by acknowledging the land that I am on, because I am coming from a different area of Canada. And so I acknowledge with respect and responsibility that I'm an uninvited guest and a settler with roots from Scotland and colonized India. And I currently reside on the traditional unceded territories of the Cowichan people, which is also colonially known as Cowichan Bay on Vancouver Island. And so the Cowichan peoples have historical relationships with the land that continue to this day, and I'm very, very grateful for being here. And I also want to acknowledge my responsibility and my commitments, both personally and professionally, to my ongoing process of decolonization. And yes, and I'm very appreciative for being here. So the cat with the thank you was definitely one that I checked off. So I want to start off when we're talking about brave spaces. First of all, to acknowledge on page 4 of your participant manual, there's an outline of some initial principles that we use to begin guiding the development of this process. And so you can feel free to take a look at them if you want, and if you're curious. But now that as a collective group of people where we've chosen to spend time together, and you've decided to share your time and your experience and your knowledge to help engage in collective actions to support the right to adequate housing and housing justice in Edmonton, we want to take a few minutes to discuss how we can work together in a brave space. And so oftentimes, and people will be familiar with sort of the concept of safe spaces and developing group guidelines to create safe spaces. And maybe by now people have heard more about brave spaces as well. But I do want to bring our attention and understand that really we have intentionally designed the process with the concept of brave space in mind. And so what do we mean by that? So first of all, on page 4, I think it's page 4, and I might be 1 or 2 pages off just because when I transferred the Google Doc into a Word doc, it might have changed slightly. So I apologize if I'm not quite on the right pages when I reference them, but I'm close. So on page 4, there's a poem actually that talks about brave space. And so at any time, feel free to read that. I have it up in my office. I really appreciate it. It helps me remind me what kind of space we need to be engaging in when we're doing this work. But ultimately, we understand that safety looks different for different people. And so we actually cannot guarantee safety because I don't know what that looks like for every single person in this space. And we know that this work is social justice work, and to be effective, it does require honest, risky, and controversial discussions, because that's what's required to dig at the roots of inequity. So sitting in and creating and holding a brave space allows us to name and clarify what people need to engage in these discussions, while not promising the illusion of collective safety, which often winds up leaning toward supporting notions of the right to comfort by people with the most power and avoiding uncomfortable situations where we basically stop at agreeing to disagree. So brave spaces acknowledge the diverse and inequitable forms of power at play and the different levels of risk and courage required to engage in difficult conversations. So it requires us to collectively agree to hold this space, to uproot the systems of oppression that continue to be barriers to accessing the human right to adequate housing. And so in the spirit of that, I just want folks to, we're going to move into a quick another Menti activity, where we're going to ask folks to, what am I going to ask you to do? To be able to think about, for you, what does being in a brave space for this session sound like, look like, and or feel like to you? And if you can either cut and paste the link that I think Tina's put into the chat, she's nodding, yes. And and just provide some of your thoughts. We'll give you a few minutes just to fill some of that in, and then Tina will bring up again the image so that we can see what folks have said. All right, Tina, do you want to just start? Maybe you can see a bit better. I can't see completely on this screen, all of them. Maybe highlighting a few that you're seeing there.
Yes. So, and I will, you know what? I can also put the link here so you can all see everybody's answers better if my share screen isn't showing them all. But definitely themes of challenging, speaking truth, not being afraid to ask questions or sharing an opinion, doing it respectfully, and listening, being curious, active listening, listening openly, respectfully.
I appreciate the recognition of biases, that we all have them, and we'll work together to recognize those. The tricky things about unconscious bias is that we don't often know ourselves that we have them, but it's the people around us that do. So to be able to engage in sort of conversations and discussions where we can bring that forward, but with compassion and humility is really important. Comfortable share my lived experience, especially about homelessness, with so many people who probably never even had these issues. Yes. So what I want to say is, as we sort of we'll move to closing this session, but Tina and I will absolutely pull these out and share them back to folks on November 2nd as the starting of that piece as well, in just recognizing that it is important to recognize and be respectful around what people need to be able to engage, and that it is our hope that people can work together to be able to create that space and that brave space today and moving forward as we work on the Pivot project. And so I also want to let folks know that feel free at any time you can private chat at like Laura or any of us. You can group chat, you can speak up in this session, and you can connect with us after the session if you want to talk or discuss further. So I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. And just share a couple points that there is a really fantastic article called From Safe Spaces to Brave Spaces, a new way to frame dialogue around diversity and social justice. And you can see there's a source there for that article on this PowerPoint. But they really talk about 5 key guidelines. And I think that this actually highlights what people have already said. So there's a recognition of controversy with civility. So a value whereby different views are expected and honored, with a group commitment to understand the sources of disagreement and to work cooperatively toward common solutions. Conflict is a good thing. It's growth, and it's a natural outcome and an opportunity to be able to move things further along. When it's not harmful and hurtful. So again, we ask for compassion and humility while engaging. Own your intentions and your impact. So oftentimes we engage in conversations with really good intentions, but impact is what we can measure. And so being able to engage and hear from people and hear with humility that potentially the intention that we had, or one of it that I had, was actually different than what the impact was, and to learn from that is really important. Consider the factors that influence your decision to challenge yourself. So be attentive to the degree to which your membership to dominant identities inform whether you will deeply engage in challenging activities or dialogue. And really thinking about what does respect look like to you. And I think that a lot of people actually named specifics around that in that quick Menti activity. And then challenging ideas and not people. So we want to be able to engage in those deep conversations and seek to understand and engage in that controversial and oftentimes uncomfortable space. But it's about challenging ideas and not the individuals. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Tina, to move us on to a bit of a primer on equity, inclusion, and justice.
So that was one of our key objectives, one of the 3 objectives for today, right? To develop a shared understanding of these terms, because really the whole pivot process is an equity-centered approach to the right to housing. And so we thought it's important to have the shared understanding of these terms in this context. And so some of these definitions that we're going to talk about are in your participant guide. I think it's page 10 to 14 or thereabouts. And really, when we offer these definitions, we really like to share simple ones that everyone can remember and use daily. Obviously, these terms are very complicated and there are long, and I know there's academics or long academic definitions for some of these things, but we're going to try and talk about them in really plain language ways today. But we also want to acknowledge that what the definitions we're offering don't really offer the true complexity of these terms and the various ways people define them. So as we're going, there's space in your guide. We've left space in your guide because we want to invite you to kind of really read and reflect and think about and expand on these definitions as we're going through them, because there really isn't sort of the one definitive correct way of thinking about these concepts. So let's start with equity. Really, for me, in its simplest form, equity means making sure everyone has what they need. Simple. The definition that we offer you in the guide is what's on the screen now: the effort to provide different levels of support based on an individual's or group's need in order to achieve fairness. So the effort, the work to achieve equity, these are verbs. Equity is action. It's intentionally identifying barriers and root causes. So asking things like, why are we in different starting places to begin with? Because we are. And then intentionally eliminating barriers to achieve equal outcomes. So if we want equal outcomes, for example, we want everybody to have adequate housing, we need to practice equity. And so this is how equity is different than equality, right? Equality was when everybody has the same amount of something, whether it's medication or food or opportunities, or in the picture, in the example we're showing you today, everybody has the same size bicycle, despite what their existing needs or assets might be, right? Or versus equity, in this bicycle example, about each person getting what they need in order to be able to thrive. So in this bicycle example, that's everyone getting the type and size of bike that they need so they can travel easily and safely. So working to achieve equity, and that's the second portion of our definition, really acknowledges the unequal starting places and the unique needs and abilities and assets we each have, and correct the imbalances as they are, so that everybody has what they need. And so this definition makes us reflect on what the unequal starting places might be. And we can think about this when it comes to accessing housing. And so the next definition I want to share with you is inclusion. And really, we've defined the definition that we're using is a state of belonging, where persons of different backgrounds and identities are valued and integrated and welcomed equitably as decision makers and collaborators and citizens. So with this example, maybe you've seen this image already about the fence at a baseball game, right? If we take the equality approach, meaning we give everybody the same size box to stand on, that's the image on the left, not everybody can see the game, right? This is exclusion because not everybody's differences are valued. In this case, obviously, taller, able-bodied folks are the ones who can see the game. We move into integration. This is where we start to take an equitable approach, meaning we give more boxes to some so that everybody can see the same, heads above the fence, right? So we're starting to create an environment where our differences, and this is where the term diversity often comes from, right? Is our differences, our diversity are valued and respected so that everyone can participate in this case, be able to see over the fence. But we really achieve inclusion when the fence is designed in a way where the boxes aren't even needed at all. So inclusive design of the fence. We can discuss whether there should be a fence at all, but that's, that would be a fourth box, which we won't get into at the moment. But if we're thinking about inclusive design of a fence, it means everybody can see just as they are. They can walk up to the fence and have no issue whatsoever, right? So diversity efforts alone do not create inclusive environments. Inclusion involves a sense of coming as you are and being accepted rather than feeling the need to assimilate. And so really, these two terms, really equity and inclusion in the end, are about respecting that there are different ways of doing things if we're imagining of how that fence needed to be built, right? And really looking to be transformed. And the last term I want to get to quickly is justice. Now, you know, there are full university courses on this issue. Philosophers have been writing about this for and debating it for thousands of years. So we're not going to have that kind of a definition. We're not going to get into that. And obviously there's a legal construct of crime and punishment and so on that's tied up with justice as well. And that's not what we're concerned with today. The way we want to talk about justice today for in the context of our work and the topic we're here to talk about is we'll do it through this sort of example of this tree, this apple tree, right? So the top left box talks about inequality, shows inequality, right? So one person has access to these apples that are falling from the tree, the other person really doesn't. And so the second one shows equality, similar to the bicycle example we just talked about, where we give everybody the same bike, or in this case, the same ladder, the same height, but it really isn't addressing the root cause, right? Is it? Because the tree's still kind of leaning to the left, it's making the apples accessible to one person, but not the other. And so if we practice equity, and that's the third image in the bottom left, right? We offer taller ladders to the person on the right, a custom tool to access the apples to try and address the inequality that exists. But the underlying condition that's holding the inequality in place, right, that's creating the inequality stays, right, doesn't it? Even though the person on the right is getting the taller ladder. And so for the practical conversation around justice, this is where we have the fourth image at the bottom, right, where the tree is straightened, it's propped up. You'll see there's a couple of planks that are actually trying to change. You know, this isn't like realistic, trees aren't kind of rubbery, but right, like it's the idea of like kind of putting in planks. There's kind of, there is a cord that's pinning the tree to the side, essentially removing the barrier for the person on the right permanently, not just accommodating them. So there's no longer a need for a taller ladder. And so really justice is when we seek this really transformational change, right? The fundamental removal of factors which create inequalities in the first place. And so the definition that we put in your guide around justice really defines it as a process, not just an outcome where we're seeking fair redistribution of resources and opportunities and responsibilities, but really ultimately we're challenging the root causes of oppression and injustice. And ultimately it's an empowerment of all people to exercise self-determination and realize their full potential. And in the end, if we do achieve justice, we're building social solidarity and community. I wanted to pause here for a sec if there are any questions or need for clarification before we move into, I believe we're going to take a quick little break, but we're going to come back and really apply these concepts to 7 key critical criteria for adequate housing that Laura's going to walk us through. And our goal is with that is to help us deepen and really build on our understanding of equity and inclusion and justice as we go into talking about applying it to context of access to housing, right to housing.
Laura's going to provide us a bit of an overview on the 7 criteria for adequate housing before we move into a small group activity to start, as Tina had said, deepening our lens on applying equity, inclusion, and justice to our right to housing. So, Laura, can I hand it over to you?
Sure, thank you. I'll just keep your spotlights on if that's okay. It's just a little easier for me. So good morning. Thank you all for coming back from your break. Hope you had a chance to have a bit of stretch and something to drink. I'm just going to go over the 7 criteria for adequate housing. So when we talk about adequate housing or affordable housing is usually the language that we hear. But adequate housing is the definition that the lab is using because it incorporates affordability. So we've heard the phrase housing is more than a house. It's more than 4 walls and a roof, according to the UN, and I'll drop the link in the chat below after I'm done speaking. At minimum, housing should meet the following criteria: security of tenure, availability of services, materials, facilities, and infrastructure, affordability, habitability, accessibility, location, and cultural adequacy. Security of tenure means that housing is not adequate if the occupants do not have a degree of tenure security, which guarantees legal protection against forced evictions, harassment, and other threats. Forced evictions meaning permanent or temporary removals against the will of individuals, families, and or communities from their homes and or lands which they occupy, without the provision of and access to appropriate forms of legal or other protection. So the encampment response right now would be an example of a violation of human rights by security of tenure. Availability of services, materials, facilities, and infrastructure means housing is not adequate if its occupants do not have safe drinking water, adequate sanitation, energy for cooking, heating, lighting, food storage, or refuse or waste disposal. Affordability means that housing is not adequate if its cost threatens or compromises the occupants' enjoyments of other human rights, meaning if housing is so expensive you could not afford adequate food, clothing, other essentials. Habitability means that housing is not adequate if it does not guarantee physical safety or provide adequate space, as well as protection against the cold, damp, heat, rain, wind, or other threats to health and structural hazards such as mold, missing beams, etc. Habitability is something we're going to be seeing more and more of with this 80-degree span between the summer and winter months with the extremes of weather. With accessibility, housing is not adequate if the specific needs of disadvantaged and marginalized groups are not taken into account. The frequent exclusion and marginalization of persons with disabilities often means that folks are rarely consulted when new housing structures or neighborhoods are developed, and our question from the audience speaks to that. Radical Inclusion just released their report on the status of rights with people in Alberta living with disabilities. I'm going to pop that chat into the room below, the link into the chat below. And I'm quoting from their report. I would really recommend that you read it. When housing is inaccessible, it not only affects one's ability to have stability, security, and dignity, it affects relationships with family and friends who do not have accessible homes. Inaccessible housing significantly impacts a person with disability ability to reach their full potential. The energy consumed navigating an inaccessible home directly limits one's ability to also engage in employment, taking care of the home, or studying, for example. With location, housing is not adequate if it is cut off from employment opportunities, healthcare services, schools, childcare centers, and other social facilities, if it is located in polluted or dangerous areas. In Edmonton, more than 70% of our neighborhoods are car reliant, which in addition to the recent transit redesign, creates additional challenges to day-to-day activities for folks. And then cultural adequacy, housing is not adequate if it does not respect and take into account the expression of cultural identity. The way housing is constructed, the building materials used, and the policies supporting these must appropriately enable the expression of cultural identity and diversity of housing. Activities geared towards development or modernization in the housing sphere should encourage that the cultural dimensions of housing are not sacrificed. And those are words to live by. So with that, I'm going to pass things back over to you, Tina and Tash.
Thanks so much, Laura. All right, folks, this is going to be the opportunity for everybody to be able to take some time in digging in a little bit deeper to one of the 7 criteria and to start thinking about it from that equity, inclusion, and justice lens that we talked about. And so we have the activity outlined in people's participant manuals as well. So please feel free to go there and be able to follow through there. And I, for some reason, don't have the page by which the activity is written on. But what I will remind folks is that the definitions, as Tina has said, because we'll be working through using definitions of equity, inclusion, and justice, they start on page 10. So we recognize that we've added more than those 3 definitions to the definitions, but those key terms, so equity, inclusion, and justice, are going to be the ones that we're going to work through in the following activity. So what's going to happen is everybody's going to get broken up into, there's going to be 7 groups. And in the small groups, using the definitions of the key terms, so equity, inclusion, and justice provided, we want you to have a discussion on how this criteria relates to, or if understanding it from the perspective of how this criteria that you will be looking at advances the concept, so equity, inclusion, and justice in housing. So you'll be starting with one concept, and you will have small group facilitators in your groups. That was like super short. I don't know how people like folks did. I mean, I'm looking at our piece. Wow, security of tenure just went. People did good, but it looks like inclusion was sort of left out. That's okay. We're just starting, and I'll say this again, and I know packed agenda, scratching the surface, all of those things. Really, at this point, this is an opportunity to just start practicing applying those concepts, or what I would say those lenses. So, I mean, I wear glasses, so it's like putting on your equity glasses, or your inclusion glasses, or justice glasses, or all 3 of them at the same time, and then taking a look at, in this situation, the sort of different forms, the different criteria that are important to adequate housing. And so we could spend, days and certainly hours within a day really unpacking and spending just the time on this activity alone. But hopefully people were able to at least start to have a bit of that conversation. Thank you, everybody, for dipping into these conversations. And like I said, recognizing that we absolutely need to be going deeper, and hopefully we'll continue to deepen that as we move along. And we will be moving along to another activity that's going to be focusing on introducing our final concept around power. After we're going to be taking a bit of a break in a couple minutes. But I want to thank everybody for just starting to really apply those lenses to some of those key criteria. I want to invite Josh or Laura to see if they have any sort of final reflections to close off this activity before we're moving on to the power piece.
I don't want to take up too much time, but I mean, I think I'm already seeing the value in using these lenses to think about adequate housing in a deeper and richer way. And my group didn't have time to get to inclusion and justice, but I think it's just really exciting to see how quickly some of these categories, which can be quite academic and technical, but how quickly when you start looking at them through these lenses, the significance of them is plain to see. So I found that really illuminating.
Thanks, Josh. Laura? You're on mute.
Thank you. And just to add to what Josh was saying, I think I'm really excited for the deep conversations that we had just the first few minutes and how quickly we really got to have these really interesting conversations, and I'm really looking forward to progressing and getting moving on the rest of the pivot. I think we're off to a great start. So thank you everyone for being so candid and open and open-minded and willing to share. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Laura. Okay, for the sake of transparency, where I'm going to go next is we're going to move on to that final concept that we've said that we're going to talk about today, which is about power. And so we're going to talk about sort of the importance of a power analysis. I'm going to offer you a framework for understanding power, which absolutely is one of many different ways that we can understand power, and people, I'm sure, have different ways of understanding it and or might be familiar with the framework I'm going to offer. We'll do an individual reflection, take a break, and come back for the second part of the power conversation. So hopefully that works for folks. So I'm going to move into power. And so let me share my screen. All right. And sorry, folks, I've got a few slides or a few different I've got two computers going, and so I'm trying to navigate both of them at the same time while I'm facilitating. So let me just say a little blurb about why we feel that it's really important to spend some time on talking about power and the concept of a power analysis as it relates to our work on justice and housing. So a power analysis process helps us navigate the different dimensions of power to understand how systems of inequity are shaped and what change should be achieved to improve the lives of the individuals and communities that are most impacted. So considering how power is at play and is an ongoing part of our work together, we'll need to find a way to work together within these diverse forms of power. So analyzing different dimensions of power, including personal, collective, social, and institutional forms of power, helps us to make sense of the challenges we face, as well as the ways power can be leveraged to address those challenges. So with that said, this is one of the frameworks that we can use to understand power. We call it the 4 elements of power. And there we all have interactions and experiences with all forms of these, with all elements of power in this way. So I'll just briefly describe each of them. So when we're talking about personal power, it's often derived from charisma, self-confidence, self-respect, the networks of support that we have, and individual characteristics that we and others value. And that value will look different through different lenses. And I absolutely acknowledge that there's a dominant form of power that is valued. And so this level of personal power absolutely intersects with our social identity power as well. And I'll get into that in a bit. Collective power is about solidarity. It's about community. It empowers one another. It's supportive. It builds creative action, and it can be leveraged to dismantle systems of inequity and oppression. Institutional power is the ability or official authority to decide what is best for others. So it's the ability to decide who will have access to resources, the capacity to exercise control over others. This can also include the position or positionality that one holds within the organization, their seniority, their influence over policies and processes, their professional networks, their access and proximity to the most powerful, or the dominant group most. And in this sense, I would consider it to be oftentimes it's top-down power over. So if people think about the other definitions of sort of understanding power within, power with, and power over, oftentimes institutional power will go in that hierarchical understanding of power over. And the final one, and we will be deepening our understanding more and doing a specific activity around social power, but I'll just introduce it right now, is it's derived from aspects of our social identity, such as gender, race, class, citizenship, that these aspects of our social identity can yield more or less power depending on the context we are in. And of course, recognizing that there are always systemic barriers and systems of oppression at play. So that's a quick overview. What I'm going to ask folks to do is to take 5 minutes, and you've got this in your participant manual. I believe it's on page 19 or 20. And there's space there for people to be able to make notes if you're a notes taker. I invite you to do that. Some people, you record your thoughts in different ways. So I want you to reflect on a time that you felt powerful. And so then think about, why did you feel powerful? So get back to that point and think about what made you feel powerful in that moment, or in that experience. And what elements of power, so thinking back to the framework and the 4 elements that I just offered you, what elements of power, so personal, collective, institutional, and or social, were at play? So I'm going to give folks 5 minutes. You can turn off your cameras if they're not turned off already, and I'll bring everybody back in 5 minutes to take, then we'll take a group break and then move into small groups for discussion. So 5 minutes. We're going to be moving directly into a small group activity now to provide an opportunity for folks to share some of their reflections. I want to remind folks of the fact that we are working within the understanding, the assumption of brave space, and that we honor people's need for confidentiality, and that people will share what they feel comfortable sharing. And so if you feel and would like to share your personal reflection of when you felt powerful, by all means do so. If you want to move right into just identifying the different forms of power and those different elements of power that were at play, please do so. And we ask folks to practice what a lot of people identified when we did that early Menti activity around active listening, compassion and humility, and seeking to understand. So with that, the small group discussion, and I will maybe ask Tina if you don't mind cutting and pasting these 2 questions in the chat, because I know that they are not in your participant guide. I think somehow we failed to include that. But so you're going to go back into your small groups. We just want you to take some time to share your reflections on which of the 4 elements of power were at play in your example and your reflection on feeling powerful. And what, if anything, can you draw from this conversation when considering addressing justice in housing? If anything, this whole relationship with power is complex, and it is uncomfortable, and it's hard. I'll say that as somebody that's been doing, certainly this work, my own lived experience, but also then been doing the work professionally for over 20 years. I still, every time we have a conversation about power and talk about power, I am reminded of how complex and how challenging and how hard it is. And it doesn't take me long to reflect on, how power has played out in, example X, Y, or Z, like at any moment in time, because it's always at play. And so I think that that's really important, and it really underscores the importance of making sure that we are considering and intentionally talking about power as we move forward working together on this work. So while again, we've sort of scratched the surface, I really invite and hope that people will continue to bring that forward and reflect on how power is at play, both individually and as a group as we move forward. And with that, I want to share with you another definition. And so this is a definition that we like. Again, there's so many different definitions of power. I'm just going to read it out loud. In reality, power is dynamic. It's relational and multidimensional, changing according to context, circumstance, and interest. Its expressions and forms can range from domination and resistance to collaboration and transformation. This is good news for social justice promoters whose strategies depend upon new opportunities and openings in the practice and structures of power. So this underscores a lot of what people have already brought forward, and certainly was a conversation that was in my small group and might have been within others as well. But what I really appreciate about this definition is it does articulate the complexity of it, and sort of there's almost a level of polarization between sort of this domination and resistance, but also that it can be used for collaboration and transformation, which that's where I get excited, and that's the space that I like to sit in and really work hard to sit in that space. But I also recognize that we are all part of a system of a colonial system, and the process of decolonization requires us to really challenge what we've been brought up in, which is oftentimes a hierarchical system of power, which is really about domination and domination and power over. And so as much as my intention is to be sitting comfortably and always in a space of collaboration and transformation, I am very alive to the fact that we can get pulled towards sort of understanding and existing within forms of power that really reinforce domination and inequity. And so, as Mulkey had so, wisely talked about and identified, we also know that power shows up in these two clear ways. So one is around privilege. And so I'll just offer this definition. So it can be understood as a set of unearned benefits given to people who fit into specific social groups. So privilege isn't about what you've been through. It's about what you haven't had to go through. Privilege allows one to leverage and benefit from their social identity power, either consciously or unconsciously. For example, some might not identify or experience the same barrier faced by others due to their privilege. And then there's positionality. And I heard this conversation happen a lot, both in small group and from the large group as well. How differences in social position and power shape identities and access in society. In acknowledging positionality, we also acknowledge intersecting social locations and complex power dynamics. So with that said, I want to move folks into us starting to unpack and look a little bit more at social identity power. And so hopefully folks have their participant manual with them. And as I've sort of briefly kind of talked about before, when we talk about social identity, we're talking about power that helps us to understand how inequity is created and maintained by a system that privileges some while oppressing others. So social identity power is derived from different aspects of our social identity, such as gender, race, class, citizenship. You look at this power wheel, the social identity power wheel, you'll see various different aspects of social identity characteristics. And so spending time to reflect on our social identity power also helps develop an understanding of intersectionality, as exposing one's multiple identities can help clarify the ways in which a person can simultaneously experience privilege and oppression. So the wheel is one way. So this wheel is one way to demonstrate how social identity relates to power. So in this wheel, we can see that dominant identities, and so I'm not talking about majority, right? So majority is in numbers, but dominant are those ones that are the closest to power. So those dominant identities are closer to power, while those that are less dominant or marginalized move farther away from that power. And so when we're talking about this form of power, we're often talking about that institutional power, that power over. And so we acknowledge that we could spend so much time on discussing the interpretation of what has been offered here. And some people might disagree with the identities that are closest to the power in the middle. But we're offering this as a way to move into our next activity. And we want to just sort of provide you with that visual as we start thinking about our own intersectional locations and our relationship to power related to social identity. So folks would have that picture in their hand in their participant manuals. And so I'm going to ask participants to move to that. I think it's page 23. And this is going to be another personal reflection. So what you're going to do is there's a space in your manual. I think even in light gray, it says like, put your name here. Put your name in the middle of the paper. And then surround your name with what makes up your identity. So you can start with the indicators from the slide, right? From the social identity power wheel. But I want you to also think about what's missing and add other elements that make up your identity. And then think about what parts of your social identity result in experiencing barriers or challenges, and what forms of social power do you benefit from? I'm recognizing the time. I'm going to wrap up the power piece for now, but it will come back again because it's got to be present and part of this conversation moving forward. And I just want to go back to really recognizing that, within this incredibly diverse group, and thank you so much for everybody for allocating and making the time to be here today. We have diverse positionality within this group. As individuals, they bring about different positions and relationships to this whole discussion and understanding and experience of adequate housing. And so Tina had gone over that at the beginning when we talk about we have a diversity. We have academics and housing advocates, housing management bodies, non-market housing providers, public sector, First Voice, and other folks as well. So people bring about different positionalities. Individually and then collectively as a group, if we think about how we might want to and hopefully can move forward together and getting to our next session, as well as through the hikes to identifying participatory action research projects, thinking about the positionality as the group collectively working towards justice in housing, in how we can leverage the institutional power that does exist. And there are people that have various different access and forms of institutional power within this group, and bringing together the collective power to influence and enact change as well. So as we move into thinking about ways to engage in action together, we need to be able to understand and name the ways that these different forms of power and positionality exist, so we can be intentional about stepping into those brave spaces, knowing that it will require diverse levels of risk and courage in sometimes really controversial and challenging discussions to do this work. This will require commitment to leading and engaging with humility and with compassion and with courage to step into those spaces of controversy and discomfort. And it requires a commitment to an ongoing process of self-reflection, to understand our personal and systemic biases, and to develop and maintain respectful processes and relationships based on mutual trust. And that will take time. And some people have those relationships and that trust already, and others do not. And we need to move forward together to work towards that. Practicing humility involves humbly acknowledging oneself as a learner when it comes to understanding one another's experiences. So as we're moving to the closing for today's session, I want to invite folks to start naming the different forms of power, that individual, collective, institutional, and social forms of power that you can leverage for housing justice. So we've included a space to reflect on these different forms of power in your participant manual. I think it's around page 25 and 26, as we continue to work on housing justice through the Pivot project. It's going to be important to be intentional about using your own power analysis to identify those potential actions. So with that, I'm going to move it over to Tina to close us off for today.
Thank you, Tash, and I echo our gratitude in you spending your morning with us. So thank you all for taking part. As we collectively deepen our understanding of equity and inclusion and justice in housing. So thank you again. We wanted to do a quick checkout. Using our head, heart, hands kind of model of what knowledge has resonated with you or maybe has confused you and we need to talk about some more and reflect on. For your heart, sort of what emotions and sensations or feelings have risen for you from what you've shared and or what you've heard today. And your hands and what you want to do, like what calls of actions you feel drawn to already. I know it's early in the pivot process, so we'd love to hear if any of those have come up for you or not. So go to the link. I will also, thank you, Lori, for putting it in the chat. And take a couple minutes to do this right now. We'd love to hear from you. And I'm going to pull up people's responses as they filter in. So give me a second to do that. Okay, just bring it up. Should be able to see as people's answers filter in. I'll also put it here if you want to open it up on your own. Love that justice is in the middle already. Transformational power and power of community and learning together. Kindness and collective effort. Love that. Thank you for sharing these, and it's very humbling to share this space with you all and hear your reflections. So thank you. You are also going to receive a short survey shortly today to give us a bit of feedback about today's sessions. Your answers are going to be anonymous. Just going to take a couple minutes for you to fill it out, and we would love to hear about what you enjoyed and want us to do more of, what we can improve for part 2, which is on November 2nd. And if there's anything particular you feel you need for the next session that we can consider as we go into it. I mean, your feedback and sharing is a gift, so we really appreciate your time in filling that out and sharing as much as you have today. So a little bit about what to expect for the next session. You will get a link to register for the next one. For part 2, we're going to spend another morning together, and we're going to cover a few things. We're going to get a bit of a presentation about the current state of housing inequity and injustice here in Edmonton. We're going to introduce you to a tool that Tasha's already hinted at that will help us, power analysis tool that will help us sort of analyze inequities within systems. So it's a systems power analysis tool that's going to be rooted in the experience of those with lived realities and experiences of housing insecurity. And then we're going to introduce you to the 5-week hike, or some of you may have heard the term design sprints or sprints. That's going to bring us, it's going to help in a virtual way, really bring your collective wisdom together and help identify, for the lab to identify some actions and some research projects and action ideas and form teams together. So you will get an email with all of that information to you in the next little bit. And have I missed anything, Tash? If not, I'd like to hand it back to Josh and Laura with much gratitude for having us with you today and sharing space with us.
All good on my end. Yeah, I'll hand it off to Josh or Laura or Laura.
Hi, thank you. I just saw a question in the chat. The November 2nd session is scheduled, I believe, for the same time, same start time.
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I guess it falls to me to wrap this up, doesn't it? I just want to thank our facilitators, Tina and Tash. That was awesome. Thank you so much for taking us through this learning. And I really felt like, personally, for me, this was just incredibly valuable, for just a valuable time just to reflect and learn from others and listen to others and their experiences. I found the activities, each in their own way, was incredibly illuminating for me. That social identity circle, I mean, when I looked at what's at the center of that circle, it occurred to me, I mean, our housing system is built around those identities, characteristics at the center of the circle: whiteness, home ownership, wealth. And so, I think there's so many insights to take away from today. Hopefully what's clear to everyone who's participated is that these are just the early steps towards building some research teams, forming some action research projects that hopefully will help pivot our city towards the progressive realization of the right to adequate housing. And our next step is that event on November 2nd, a virtual gathering, which Tia and Tash will be joining us again for. And this orientation today was really just to kind of get us together, give us some terms to work with, develop some shared understandings, learn from each other, build some relationships, and hopefully we've made some hopefully we've accomplished some of that today. I think we have from my point of view. We're always interested in your feedback and your input and how we can improve this process, make it more accessible. The pivot process that we presented and laid out is certainly a kind of backbone, and hopefully we can, where necessary, build some other components that will make it even more inclusive for folks. Like Tina mentioned at the very outset today, we brought together just today a very diverse group, people from different sectors that touch on housing, different stakeholder groups, people with lived experience. I wanted to point out, though, that as a matter of equity, we do have a small honorarium for those folks who are here as First Voice advocates, here as people with lived experience and are really just volunteering their time, are representing an organization, and we have a small honorarium for those folks. So we have a list of registrants, people who've identified as coming from that background, and we'll certainly reach out to you. But if you are here as a First Voice advocate, a person with lived experience, and would like an honorarium, please, if you don't hear from us, please contact us, and we'll make those arrangements. Laura, is there anything I missed?
No, I think you captured it all. And just to add to what you've said, just thank you all for joining us. I think we're off to a great start. And we're really looking forward to our next event on November the 2nd. So thanks.